Setbacks are temporary, but comebacks, they are legendary. Welcome back to the PSI Effect, where we pause, shift, and ignite purpose that speaks louder than your past. This is Nuge, and together with Frankie, we're your hosts in this space, and your comeback starts now.
We are your hosts on this podcast for people who want to rise on purpose. So, Frankie, what's up? What's going on, man? What's good?
Man, just trying to hold on, trying to keep it in the road, as the folks would say back in the day. You know, it's always busy, between family, work, kids, all those different things. There's a lot of things, pulling on the attention, but, got to find a way to get it all done and keep things moving forward. But it's been a good week. Really, excited about our last episode. Looking forward to our episode today.
Indeed, I was pretty excited about the last episode as well, and was really looking forward to this time that we get to spend, together, just interacting, but also sharing with our audience. So, yeah, it has been a good week. It's been a good week. And it's always busy. We say it up from week to week, but there's always something to do, and so we just find a way to do it.
You got to.
Yeah, you got to. So yeah, it's been a good week. So yeah, let's get in it. So it's time to just pause and shift and ignite. And today we're talking about how did I get here, right? How did I get here? And so in talking about that, we're talking about setbacks, right? We're talking about setbacks. We're talking about comebacks, and when you how do you end up in a situation where you had this setback, right? What transpired? Was it something that you did to create that setback for yourself? Was it an outside force? What was it? So how did we get here? And I know that I have been in some situations where I have asked that question of myself, and pondered it and pondered it and pondered it. But like you spoke about in the last episode, Frankie, is that so these setbacks and these challenges are can be very helpful in how you grow, right? It could be a big part of your growth spurt out of a certain chapter in your life, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And when we think about, how do we get here? That's really the first step in the pause that we talk about, where we really start to lean in to the power of the pause, where we can start to assess what went on. What are the things that added up to land me where I am right now? Because many times it's not going to be a singular thing that happens. It's actually a summation of a chain of events, chain of decisions, actions, what have you, that lead us to our current situation. And for us to properly be able to navigate our way out of that, so we can shift our mindset and get to the ignition where we rise on purpose, we really have to know, all right, what are the things that kind of got me to where I am right now, as best as we can define them. And sometimes that may be difficult.
Yeah, I tell you, the journey is sometimes long, and sometimes the road is really dark. But it's that as we talked about before, the introspection that helps pull you out of that muck, if you will. So as we think about setbacks and comebacks, which by the way, setbacks are not the end, right? It's not the end at all. Right? Setbacks are just a little small part of it, and to set you on a beautiful path. It can set you on a beautiful path. But in thinking about setbacks, I mean, have you ever looked around at your life and thought, this wasn't the plan, right? This was not the plan.
Oh,
What led
good
to this
gracious.
moment, because, we all have the plan, right? We have a plan that for ourselves, right? Um, or, we have a vision of where we think, the road is going to take us. And we don't always think about the bumps in the road along the way. So, have you ever looked around and thought, this wasn't the plan?
Man, yeah. I mean, is every day an acceptable answer there? I mean, because good gracious, there are instances in every day like, man, this isn't exactly what I had planned for the day. But if we're talking about, our setbacks and those trials and tribulations that we have to navigate, yeah, I mean, it's, I love the Mike Tyson quote, everybody's got a plan, so you punch them in the face. And that's the exact same thing for us as we're navigating life. We might not be pugilists in the boxing ring, but we're trying to navigate our way through life, and we have a plan, we have aspirations, we have goals, we have those little to-do lists with check boxes that so many people love to see. Like, yeah, I love it when a check box gets checked and I can move on to the next thing. And despite our best efforts, sometimes those plans aren't going to lead us where we want to go. And yeah, that getting off course is par for the course many times, because oftentimes things aren't going to go according to plan. And I think, Nuge, what that kind of points to is a necessity for flexibility for us as individuals, where we can't just be so rigid that if one thing goes um, not according to plan, that we just snap. We have to have a certain level of pliability to be able to adapt once we figure out, all right, where did I get off course? Where did it land me? And how do I get back on course? What are your thoughts on that?
Hey, absolutely. I tell you, I've had some challenges with setbacks in professional life. I remember very specifically one of my first leadership roles, and it was a role back in the day, and I just, man, I was young and I was living life and I was having fun and I was doing a job that was expected of me. I didn't think that it was any real big deal, anything real outstanding, out of the ordinary. And I had a lot of coworkers at the time that just kept pushing me. And you need to go into management. And I'm thinking to myself, why on earth would I want to do that? But man, they pushed me and pushed me and pushed me, because clearly they saw the value in what I was bringing, uh, much better than what I saw myself. And so they pushed me, and they were actually talking to people that I didn't know they were talking to. Like, you need to look at this guy because this guy's, he can be part of your company and he can manage and this and that and all of them. They just talking me up, right? So the long and short of it is, I said, okay, I put my name in the hat for this position with this company, and went through a series of interviews, and I'll never forget, one of the last interviews, I was in Chicago. They flew me out to Chicago. We had dinner, and the guy who was taking me around, he said, "Okay, so tomorrow, we're gonna go to this little town out here, Rock Island, Illinois." I'll never forget. And I didn't know anything about Rock Island, Illinois. I thought it was, a suburb of Chicago, because when they interviewed me and they talked about this position, they were talking about Chicago. I was like,
Right?
cool, Chicago. Never really been there, spent a lot of time there, but I was like, okay, at that age, I was like, okay, Chicago's cool. The bad part was I was sick as you know what, and I was so
Oh,
sick.
man.
Can you imagine being in an interview for a position that is, like the trajectory of your future for the next few years, right?
Hmm.
And I know that I probably was not talking very coherently. My head was swimming, and I don't know what the sickness was, flu, whatever it was, but it was awful. It was awful. So I get to the hotel, go sleep, we get up, and so we start this drive going to Rock Island, Illinois. Now I'm thinking in my mind, I'm going to be working in Chicago, right? Chicago style pizza, Chicago Cubs, Chicago Bears, right? Even though I'm not from Illinois, but I'm thinking, okay, we got all this stuff going on.
Right.
That drive was 3 hours.
Whoa.
We pulled over at one point. He said, we're going to pull over here and we're going to take a break. And I'm still sick. I said, listen, man, like, where is this place? How far, where are we going? They say it's about 3.5 hours from Chicago.
Mm.
So I get out there and everything's fine. But my point is, in saying all of that is, that was not my plan to end
Right.
up in Rock Island, Illinois. It turned out to be fantastic, right? But in my mind, it was not Chicago. That was not part of the plan that I had for agreeing to these interviews, agreeing to work in Chicago, and to end up in Rock Island, Illinois. But it was a beautiful little place right on the Mississippi River. It's great. It was absolutely wonderful. But it wasn't my plan. And I just had to dig in. I didn't know anybody there. I didn't have any family there. I didn't have any family close. It was just me. But I got along. I had to figure it out, right? I made the commitment to take the job. I had to figure it out. And it turned out to be a good movie. So things don't always turn out the way that you plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's a great example too, Nuge, of, a shift in your perspective. Because, you recognize that this doesn't seem to be all that it's cracked up to be, but it sounds like you had a shift in your perception of what your goal was going to be. And shifting that perception, you realized that you could still achieve that goal, even though you weren't going to be in Chicago proper. You're going to be in this place 3.5 hours outside of Chicago. It still checked the boxes for the endeavors, for the objectives that you had set forth for yourself, even though it wasn't exactly like you had thought it would be.
Yeah, it definitely was not. It was unexpected. Put me on a different path, but it all worked out. So, as you say, if you have the right mindset, you can make things happen in the right kind of ways, or you can help things happen in the right kind of ways. I mean, it could have been very different, right? I could have just sulked and
Right.
been all frustrated, and it could have turned it out very wrong. So, yeah. So let me ask you another question. Excuse me. Ask you another question. So, what subtle shifts or small decisions add up to a place um, you never expected to be?
Well, that can go in two directions, really. That seems to be a spectrum where, subtle shifts, subtle changes land us closer to, something positive that we didn't expect. And the same could be true for subtle shifts adding up to put us things that have more negative connotation to them. Which direction do we want to go on the spectrum there? I like to visualize this as, in my youth, I enjoyed those choose your own adventure type of books. You know what I'm talking about? Where, you start reading in the story, and then when you get to the end of a particular page, you have a choice. There's a decision to be made. And based on that decision, you would go to another page in the book and, you would see what the outcome would be. Sometimes it would be a great outcome. Sometimes it would be a not so great outcome in the storyline. And, for our lives as we're going through life, to a certain extent, it's very similar in that, we have an experience. We've set a direction that we want to go. And along the way, there are choices that we have to make to kind of determine what's the next step going to be. Is it going to move me closer or further away from where I want to be? So 100%, that collection of small choices is what ultimately determines our outcome. The challenging part is understanding what's within your control, what you actually have a choice about, and the things where you may not necessarily be in control of how things go or the outcome, and really being able to navigate those in a way that isn't going to make you feel like you're boxed in, or not making you feel like you're boxed in or discouraged with um, the direction you're going.
Absolutely. I think I, I like what you're saying about the books and, how when you get to the end of a certain part that you have a decision to make because, that's every day, right? You have a decision to
Right.
make and things are coming at you constantly. And, sometimes I think what happens is, we can just drift, right?
There you
We
go.
can just drift and like we're in that what do they call it, that floating pool,
The
and we
lazy
just
river.
the lazy river, and you just
Yeah.
kind of like you just like letting things in life just carry you on down the road, right? Um and so I think that's something that can be subtle, right? You get to a point where you get complacent or comfortable, what have you, and then that lazy river, just call it the lazy river syndrome, it'll just take over, right? And just move
Right.
you on down the road. And so, and that too can affect, the design of your plan if you're not careful, if you're not paying attention to what's happening in your life. You can just go for a while and just let things carry you the way they are, and then you wake up kind of like the title of this particular episode is like, how did I get here? Just
Right.
fell asleep at the wheel.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that lazy river analogy is so appropriate. I mean, I know there have been times in my life, academically, professionally, socially, where you're just kind of just floating along. It's like, all right, I'm not necessarily in a bad state right now, not exactly where I want to be, but it's tolerable. So I'm just going to float, down the river for a little while. But it's a trap, because the lazy river doesn't necessarily take you where you want to go. It's going to take you wherever it's flowing. So you're kind of at the mercy of that flow. And if you stay in that state too long, it's like you said, you're going to be like, oh, wait a minute. I was trying to get way over there, but now I'm way over here. And this situation is totally off target from what I wanted for myself.
Absolutely. And that's a pretty good segue into my next question, which is, how do you know when something in your life it no longer fits, right? Even if it once did.
Wouldn't it be awesome if it was as obvious as clothing, right? Because we know when our clothing no longer fits. Unfortunately, I've run into that more frequently than I would
No,
like to here lately, because,
let's not talk about that, okay?
I like eating. I didn't get this big eating salad and all, but if it was that binary as being able to know whether your clothes fit or not, it would be a lot simpler for us to, I don't know, maybe purge is too strong of a word, but prune things from our lives that don't fit in there anymore, that don't continue to move us forward towards our goal. So, I want to make sure that, I'm clear here. I'm not suggesting that everything, everyone in our lives has to serve some sort of purpose to push us towards a goal. But I would say that it can't be something that holds us back. If something is created, like if we imagine ourselves, flying through the air, we're trying to be Superman in our own lives to achieve a goal. Um, and if something is creating too much drag and slowing us down as we're trying to fly towards that goal, I think that's another great opportunity to pause and kind of assess, all right, why is this causing drag? Why am I feeling inertia here that's pulling in a different direction of where I'm trying to go? And that's a good segue into the evaluation process of saying, all right, well, take a closer look at this thing. And, what does this thing mean to me? What does this person mean to me in my life? And how does this person or this thing fit into the grand scheme of, me not getting stuck on the lazy river, me moving towards my goal, me trying to just be a better human?
Yeah, I think I think I think my gut just tells me things, right? And I think this is true for a lot of people where you have this unsettling, right? You feel off kilter, right? When things don't fit, right?
Mhm.
And it can be professional or it can be personal, right? But you just have this unsettling about things. Um, and and I know a lot of times we don't pay attention to stuff like that, right? We just kind of shake it off as this or that or the other. But that gut feeling is just real, right? And
Absolutely.
we may feel so passionately about something that we kind of ignore what that gut is
Mm.
is saying, right? And uh the other part of that is not paying attention to that unsettling, not paying attention to that uh inner conflict. It could close the door on some growth that you were looking for, right? And a lot of times we
Absolutely.
wish for things, we pray for things, and it comes along, but we have an inner conflict, and we're not really seeing what that um, what that growth is, or what that thing that we have been hoping for that has come along. We miss it, right? The door closes on it because we're not paying attention to what our inner self is telling us. So I think that subtle uh, uh, that subtle nudging of our inner self um, just tells us a lot of times that something's not right here, or something's coming along that we need to pay attention to. So
Mhm. Yeah. And, the visualization I have of that is, um, back in the day cartoons where something's going down, you got a little angel on one shoulder, you got a little devil on the other shoulder trying to tell you what's going on.
absolutely,
And sometimes it's difficult to listen to that inner voice. For me especially, it's hard to hear that inner voice talking, especially when the things I'm seeing, that the data I'm collecting from the outside world may not exactly line up with what that voice is telling me. Because our inner voice we may have a level of perception that we don't fully understand. And that's when we get into the most conflict with that inner voice, is when we've got that gut feeling, but it doesn't seem to line up with what we see going on around us. Um, I got into a situation professionally, and I'm sure we'll touch on various aspects of this, as we continue through with the podcasts, where I had a gut feeling that inner voice was speaking, and I chose not to listen. And it ended up affecting me in a pretty bad way. Just a quick synopsis. I've been working at a company for 18 years. Was in a leadership role, executive leadership team, and we ended up selling the company to a publicly traded entity. And once we got to kind of see the peek behind the curtain of the company that acquired us, there were a lot of things that didn't line up with how I perceived leadership and what leadership should be and things like that. And my inner voice started chirping quite vigorously. And I didn't want to listen because I felt like I was going to be bailing out before I knew what was going on, or before I'd given things a chance. And then what I really discovered in retrospect is that I probably didn't listen because I thought that I could affect change in that acquiring company to try to merge, bridge the gap, so to speak, in my level of perception of what, leadership actually meant. Long story short, what ended up happening is that, um, you know, they were not interested in changing, and I ended up getting laid off and had to find a whole new job. But if I had listened to, that voice sooner, I could have saved myself a lot of stress, a lot of headache, and started looking for a new opportunity somewhere else a lot sooner without having to endure quite a bit of professional pain, throughout that experience. So that inner voice is absolutely essential, and being able to hear that inner voice is a gift.
It is. It is a gift, and it's a gift that I think that, we all have. We just, um, we don't own it. We don't hone that gift. And I'd be real interested, in our audience, some of the experiences they have with this because, um, it happens all the time, right? It happens all the time. Something happens and, things don't fit and we rationalize our way through it in a way that, like you just described, like you felt like you could affect change. And
Right.
honestly, I've been in that boat myself. So I'd be interested to hear what our audience has to say about that particular topic and just hear some of the stories, some of the experiences that they have gone through in the same um, in that same arena where things just don't fit anymore. Mm,
Yeah.
good stuff. Well, I got another question for you.
What you got?
Well, so when you trace your story back, what part of you was always trying to rise, even in survival mode?
Survival mode. So, I think of
Yeah,
survival
you've been
mode.
there, right?
Yes, absolutely. I'm just trying to make it to the next day. I'm trying to make sure that, all the essential elements of life are in place for me to continue. Do I have food? Do I have shelter? Or the people around me that I'm responsible for have everything that they need? And just trying to check the very minimal boxes to just keep on existing. And that's a tough place to be because if you're in survival mode, it's very hard to not have tunnel vision on just navigating survival mode. But for me, in the times where I have been in survival mode, one thing that's always been kind of churning in the background, trying to move me towards the rise, shifting my mindset and moving me towards, that ignition that results in the rise is a thirst for knowledge, learning along the way. Even in the midst of my storms, even in the midst of things going wrong, going off the rails, there's learning to be had. And, just taking it in, even if it's subconsciously, just taking in the information about the situation, using it as a data point to guide future decisions. Because, that's part of the pause is that we need to make sure we, take that information in and use it as fuel for future decisions to help us avoid getting in that spot again down the road.
Yeah, and for me, I think what it is, growing up, we didn't have a whole lot growing up. I mean, I don't, I didn't miss anything from my perspective growing up. I mean, my parents, especially my mom, made sure that we had what we needed to have. And as a kid, you don't really know any better. I mean, you don't really learn about your childhood and it what was really going on until you get up some size. But one of the things that mom always told us, no matter what, was that you can, right? You can. And I think for me, um, that's what, you know, pushes me, when I don't think that I can, come back, or if I don't think that I can, or if I have struggle with, uh, any situation, the part that's inside of me that is trying to rise is that piece that says, that you can, right?
Yeah.
You don't always know how you can, but that knowing that you can. I mean, and that means a lot, because my mother was she was a beautiful lady. She was smart, and she was just very encouraging, right? Um, and I know a lot of people, didn't grow up that way,
Right.
right? And a lot of people probably grew up with a whole lot more of that. But um, that that's saying about I can, or that you can. Um, and some days, depending on what the situation was, I told you before in the last episode that my parents they weren't stingy with the ride, right?
Right.
So there was you can, and then sometimes there was you will. Um,
Yeah.
and so even with that, I think that's important to frame, because I think they go hand in hand, right? You can, but then, oh yeah, I can and I will, right? Um, that struggle has been real in some situations in my life, and you'll hear about some of that as we go along. But I think that's what really plays a part in, um, where I have that part that I always want to rise, is because I think about, my mother she would just never let us quit. She just never let us
Hmm.
quit. And so, um, I will always have that I can, as a part of who I am, and I'll rise. I may fall, I may stumble in that
Absolutely.
rise, but you know, my mother said I can, and I can. Right?
Absolutely. 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 And that Michelle Obama's book, her first book that she wrote, Becoming, she said something that really resonated with me right along those same lines. She said, success is a feeling long before it's an outcome.
Hmm.
So, what you're talking about with what your mother instilled in you, the feeling that you could, the notion that you could was a prerequisite before you could get to the outcome. So that just that spirit of knowing that you can, and also to a certain extent, the fear of knowing that you must in certain situations, or that you will in certain situations, because you're going to have that motivation, coming from the people around you, you know, definitely
Yeah,
helps fuel that rise.
yeah. That the faith definitely comes before reality, right?
Mhm.
Cool, good stuff. All good stuff. Well, Frankie, tell me, you got any other thoughts for our audience? I think we're getting to the point where we're at the end here. So, what kind of parting thoughts might you have? I mean, I think I feel good about this dialogue that we have, and I really appreciate that. We have this space to talk about some of these things. And, I know that as we move forward, that we're going deeper than where we have these last couple episodes. But I really appreciate the time that we've had today and to share with our audience. And I still would really like to hear some of the audience thoughts about, what they thought got them to certain situations that they had to overcome, what setbacks that pushed them to a point where they had to overcome. I really would like to hear some of those stories.
Yeah, as would I. This time, this conversation, just being able to sit here and chat with you about our experiences, and in the hopes that, um, not only that it helps us as we share with one another, but that it helps other people as well, on their journey. And, specifically with today's, conversation, leaning into that leaning into that pause and that reflection time to kind of take a look back as to, what led to a certain situation. There's so much power there in understanding, how you got to where you are, because those are going to frame the decisions and the things that you do to begin that rise. And I think it's a great place for us to get started.
Awesome. Well, that's it for now, folks. This is the PSI effect. Be intentional about your journey, and just remember that setbacks are temporary. Comebacks, though, are legendary. Just remember that setbacks are temporary, comebacks are legendary. So go and rise on purpose. Thank you all very much.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the PSI Effect podcast. This show doesn't happen without you, and you can connect with us via Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit our website at thisispsipod.com and find us on YouTube and social media at This Is PSI Pod. That's at This Is PSI Pod. Until next time, remember, be brave and rise on purpose.